it. Um, thank you. I was just relaying how I wanted to hear as many voices as possible in this particular fireside because it's always the goal in fireside. So maybe that was a good reason to stay on mute. I'll be very brief this week. We're in week 5 of kernel block 9. Uh, that's the week that marks just past the midway point. And for many of you, you've made this week really special by participating with us in Expo. Expo, it is a chance to look at like what is in progress, what is alive, what are the ideas that we're most exploring right now. And over the first 2 days, we've not been disappointed by a broad range of ideas, and we're going to finish strong tomorrow with Friday's Expo. So thank you to everyone who's already shared their work and their work in progress and their craft and their ideas. And looking forward to the final day tomorrow. This week primarily focused on tokens. And I'm going to be really brief in some of my introduction, and I'm going to use the module as a means to get going. Just important note, and Nathalia also mentioned this was interesting to her. I mean, it took us 5 weeks before we started to talk about tokens. Really, 4 weeks at the beginning of the program are a bit more backwards looking, just like what was Bitcoin, what was Ethereum, what is this whole idea of the global financial system? When you have a decentralized financial system on a global permissionless compute layer, you start talking about it as a global computer. What does it mean to take back the web? And only in internet age institutions did we start to think about like the future a bit. And I think that that's really the emphasis that we want to place with tokens, is that while we may have seen some things in the first few years, our instinct with this module was to write it in such a way that like the best was still far ahead of us in terms of the types of tokens that we might introduce. And the way that that was done in this module is to define tokens perhaps in more dictionary focused terms and more etymological terms. So I'll just start with a few things there. The dictionary starts by saying that a token is a thing serving as a visible or tangible representation of a fact. A thing serving as a visible or tangible representation of a fact. There are pointers to badges. Then you have the computing-based definition, which was provided, which is the smallest meaningful unit of information in a sequence of data for a compiler, or a sequence of bits passed continuously between nodes in a fixed order, enabling a node to transmit information. Enabling a node to transmit information. We get to the more succinct idea there, which is that broadly speaking, tokens seem to transmit information about facts. And we use that as a means of kicking off the possibilities beyond just what we might have seen so far, but also learning from what we have seen so far. The other thing that I wanted to point out, maybe as a beginning, is that if we look at it more in the terms of incentives that we've seen, there's this new addition that has been made to the syllabus over the blocks from Ben Edgington, where it talks about the goals of the incentives in some of these token systems that we've seen so far. And, you know, every game is meant to be adjusted and changed over time, which is something we talked about in the Learn Track Junto yesterday. But Kaushik brought up this section, and I thought it was really an important part to bring out. So the goals might be that ideally we want this mix of security and availability. And on the security side, that means that we want ideally nothing bad to ever happen, for us to do no harm with this system or for the system to not fail, and that for something good eventually to happen, which leads to the idea of availability. And the thought that tokens can help us in three ways. They can provide the possibility for rewards when certain facts take place, can be penalties for behaviors that hinder the protocol, and punishments if there are outright attacks on the protocol. So that's from incentives. There's also this broader point here that's kind of hidden and tucked away, that maybe some of our tokens might be able to incentivize things that we previously have struggled to incentivize. And what does it look like when tokens are used towards providing or placing value in places where they previously were not? But yeah, we can kind of take it wherever we're meant to go. I am glad that we have Andy and Nathalia with us today to kick us off into dialogue, and hope that we have the capacity for much greater discussion. Perhaps Andy, if you can help introduce Nathalia and kind of the context for the conversation, given that it's one that's really been an in-progress one, and has been active for both of you, and we start from there.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm really excited to have an ongoing conversation with Nathalia, Livia, and Lisa, all of whom have been through kernel blocks of some kind. And Livia and Lisa were not able to join us today for different reasons, and we send all of our love to Livia, especially, who's returning to her homeland. But the reason that I wanted to have these people join us is that they have been conducting some really incredible research, which is multidisciplinary and which looks at tokens in one of the most precise and substantive ways that I have seen, and yet also holistic. So it's not just what are these things from an engineering perspective, what are these things from a currency perspective, what are these things from shill my bags and pump.fun kind of thing, but really like what are they at the moment and where can they take us? I think that if you are still with us, and indeed if you've read any of Module 5, you will understand that a lot of the content in kernel is grounded in reality, but also aspirational. And it's especially true of Module 5. It's like, this is what tokens could be. Tokens, definitionally are those things which transmit facts in the smallest meaningful unit of information in computer protocols. But that's not the full story. Anybody who's been around, who is looking with anything like an unbiased lens at the spaces that currently exists, will know that that's not the only way in which tokens have been used. And so I really appreciate the research that Nathalia, Livia, and Lisa have done in terms of investigating the broader field of like, what are tokens as they currently exist in the world at the moment? What are they being used for? Who are the people that are doing it? What are the ways? So, Nathalia, would you please give us a brief overview of the research report that you produced, the reason for doing it, and perhaps some of the most surprising things for you personally that popped out of the work that you did, because that would be a lovely place to start this discussion, and then we will go from there and invite lots of other voices.
That's good. Hello, everyone. And maybe before I start with the overview of the report itself, I think it makes sense to share a bit of how I came to it. Yeah, I am originally from Brazil, and that's where a lot of my work is. And I was in the initial team of DAO in 2017-18. That's when I started working with crypto. But besides that, a lot of my work comes from art and culture. I'm an engineer, but I'm also a dancer and work with a variety of groups in Brazil and also here in California, where I'm at right now. I co-steward a school called the School for Inclement Weather, where we look at how to better listen to the weather, and weather being the atmosphere we're in and the different levels of complexity that we see today in the world. So yeah, how to be with complexity. And yeah, through my work with Web3, we saw, the rise of the use of tokens and also the term token engineering by many of our colleagues and people in the ecosystem. We're having a really hard time defining what that was. What are we really doing? What are token engineers doing? What are some definitions that we can ground ourselves in and ground our work in? And yeah, so Livia, who was at the Token Engineering Commons at the time, noticed the need for a study to really listen to practitioners and people involved in the ecosystem, and look at things like what is a day in your life? What are some of the activities that you are holding? What are the definitions you're using? What is the token engineering process, if there is one? Because it is such a complex system. It's really hard to really, define in rigid models. So how might we anchor that in different contexts and be able to talk about it and collaborate in different ways? And yeah, so the study basically looked at that, different processes for token engineering, definitions, main challenges that practitioners were experiencing in their work, core needs and their wishes for the future of the field. And yeah, it was so rich. It was a really humbling experience to listen to the 41 participants and then write this report.
Incredible. Yeah, it's such a wonderful thing to get to connect each time we do. I get to see another facet of the jewel that is Nathalia. So perhaps we can step through, especially those last three sections, the main challenges, the core needs, and hopes for the future. So starting with main challenges, like what were the things for you personally that just kind of stood out as being like, wow, like that seems potent, or that seems surprising, yeah, I'm very curious.
Yeah. So something that's really important for me and my work is space to listen. And I think that, again, dealing with complex systems, we really need time to digest and metabolize what we're doing. And we heard that a lot from people, that things are moving so fast in the field that it's really hard to have the capacity to really pause and also to communicate. So communication was a huge challenge, both in terms of engineers and designers talking to clients who maybe think that they want something and they're really sure of what they want to build, but not always are familiar with the systems that we're working with and the tools that are available to build, or externalities. So yeah, there is a big challenge on like how to talk to clients, or how to talk between teams that are extremely multidisciplinary and are using different vocabularies. And also a big challenge around how to go from beginner to experienced, because there's such a lack of experts in this new field that they're usually very short in time and can't really offer mentorship. in a way that most beginners would like. And I think that's also why I appreciate spaces like Kernel so much, and the focus on practice and serve, because I think that's really a core need that we see in this space, and where we can also allow time for us to pay attention to what really excites us in the work we do. Maybe, look at what's honest, beyond the initial spark, um, and how to build consistency, how to be able to pay attention to the externalities and implications of what's happening. So yeah, those are a few things, but there are so many more.
So I want to dig on just on two of them. The first, there is this irony for me in the difficulty that we have with communication, in contrast to the fact that tokens definitionally are those things which transmit information. So what is the difference in your world between transmitting information and communication? And where are the ways in which that might be bridged?
Mm. Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind is that with transmitting information, we're sending something out, many times with assumptions, or with um, yeah, with like a fixed idea, maybe, we feel it a fixed thing that we're sending out, but that the way that lends with other actors, or other pieces of the system is a different story, and the way that navigates, back and forth and beyond in very unexpected ways, I think is more, gets more into communication, especially the unpredictability of the plurality of agents. So yeah, how to be with that unexpectedness of communication is very interesting to me. What do you think,
Beautiful.
Eddie?
I love that. For those of you, the rabbit hole is deep there because Claude Shannon wrote this incredibly and genre-defining paper called A Mathematical Theory of Communication, which was the place where bit comes from, a binary digit, and in there there's this deep link between information and unexpectedness. The information in a message is defined as the level of unexpectedness in it. So that's a lovely way to go and have a look. But the other question that I have for you, and it links to this multidisciplinary approach that you took, and also to your own multidisciplinary presence here, both engineer and dancer. We have had some really amazing dancers come through Kernel, and I will link a page now with all sorts of inspiration from like Nancy Stark and just really amazing dancers. And this lack of experts, it speaks to something in technology that I've seen and struggled with myself, which is, broadly speaking, the lack of elders. And I wonder, are there lessons that we can take from other fields, ways that we can think about like eldership, which might help introduce a bit more wisdom in the face of that particular challenge?
Yeah, I love that question. And I was just a couple of weeks ago at the Web Camp, which is a place where it was so fun to witness the multi-generational presences, from a lot of children and a lot of elders from the internet, elders that participated in the creation of the internet. And I think, yeah, that's really important for me, and how we can look at other areas for inspiration around that. But something that really caught my attention with some of the internet elders is how they said that, again, the word unexpected. So many of the things that they thought were, like the most well done pieces, of the work didn't go anywhere. But a lot of the weird things ended up catching and going forward. And also the importance of relationality. And I think that we can see that in many other areas and many other wisdom lineages, which again for me goes back to our capacity to listen. And I think in Web3 it can be really potent for us to maybe like listen to the places around us too, and that can have many layers to it. But I remember when I first joined, I was the only Brazilian I knew working with Web3. And it was so hard for me to find a shared context and like a shared culture online. And of course, there was the shared excitement and the shared, like, oh my goodness, how do we can create different relationships to value. We can create, different modular systems. That was so exciting. But the ability to really stay with the cultural context is something that feels very important. And that doesn't need to necessarily be, like local, but there's really something for me about like the local, corporeal, and like poetic contexts.
Unexpected localities. I see that Elizabeth has unmuted, and I just want to offer you if you have anything to add there.
Oh my Lord, I can't believe I unmuted, but I will happily ask a question. Actually, I'm also a dancer, and I trained as a competitive traditional Irish dancer. And I don't know why my camera's not. I want to see you all, but you're not seeing me. I'm sorry about that. I don't know why it's not working. But and then I moved into tango, which like tango is, there's a lot of misconceptions about tango, but essentially it's a walk, right? And it's this very sort of like, it looks like magic is happening, but it's completely unchoreographed. It's all spontaneous, and it's a conversation. And as a community of artists who are attempting to be remunerated for their work, and B, build a local economy where value isn't just value can be transferred in lots of ways, which goes back to this token idea. Nathalia, do you know of any communities that are doing this effectively? That's a really big question, I know that. But it's one of the very clear use cases for a local token. But I'm really struggling to get anyone that I know to like be willing to experiment and explore the options with me where I live. Because they're still struggling just, to put food on the table. So this is an extremely interesting group. I shouldn't say that's hyperbolic because all artists are extremely interesting, but this is a really dedicated group of artists who are attempting to create a community where, needs are met and beauty is valued, and we can do that better together, right? And I clearly see a through line into supporting Web3 adoption and Web3 projects in that attempt. I just don't really have a lot of good examples to show them to like get people excited about trying, because it takes so much mental effort to learn. and to bridge that knowledge gap, which I'm willing to be here to like do that. But people aren't seeing the vision I'm seeing yet. So that's my question for you.
Hmm. It is so difficult and humbling. And I think there are a number of folks experimenting with it. Drew just shared grassroots economics. I think, there are many like local and non-Web3 experiments that are so valuable to the ecosystems as well. But I'm thinking also of CCI, Center for Cultural Innovation, and the way that they incentivize experimentation with artists and local communities in really beautiful ways. And I think, yeah, and it's just like focused on the long run. I think that there is a really interesting like balance, to think of, yes, like let's incentivize experimentation and like in a playful way, not as like we need to get this right and we need to really like prove anything, like prove that tokens are this new system that can do X, Y, Y, Z, I think let's take a soft route. Like, can we just like bring softness into the experimentation, and like really we don't need to necessarily even like use the web for it. Sometimes we can just step back and like think of collaborative processes and yeah, maybe start there, like give time for curiosity to spark. Um, and like from, and if it sparks, then before like, oh, I actually want to play with this. I want to try it. But coming from a place of curiosity instead of like forcing the yeah, participation. And what else? Yeah, honestly, I've been a bit distant from some of these experiments now. That was I shifted a lot of my work to psychoanalysis recently, and I'm doing just a lot more work with that locally in Brazil. So I'm sorry I don't have really specific examples right now, but CCI I think is doing something really interesting.
Thank you.
I wonder
Amazing
if
stuff.
we bring some of the stuff that came up in Learn Shark Junso yesterday. There was this like thread that Nick Kolika started on proof of, in air quotes, work, but this idea of like tangible representation of fact, the proof of workout or proof of dance or proof of like some tangible action in a local space as a means of building up like kind of like almost like a database of things that are cared about. I don't know, like if Nick, you're here, I see a Nick here, so it might be
Yeah,
the.
I can speak to it a bit more. So my thought on it was more of like kind of surveying or engaging like groups to identify what areas are the most valuable to them, and then define proof of work around that so that you can kind of define what your community is, what work is being performed. And then I was thinking of tying like sponsors, like local businesses, related groups in this space. I think you have bigger players that often will give some money for doing like groups like this. So like you can see this proof of work that's happening, the values that a community holds. So not only on the values, but the amount that people are doing, and then you can funnel tokens or money, sponsorship, whatever you want to do surround those communities or just even participate. So you can use those in your decision-making process. That's my thinking of it.
And if Reese, Zaremba, anyone else who was at Learn Shark Junto was one thing after another that kind of built off of each other. So if anyone wants to add anything that they remember that stood out to them.
So I can maybe just comment on part. I might not remember the whole conversation, so I'll just concentrate maybe on my part. What I thought was so interesting is thinking about token. So the thing that is a visible or tangible representation of a fact, that means more facts can be represented and more facts can be financialized, and that this means that there is this economic and technical revolution where suddenly more things can be expressed, more things can be financialized. And that on one hand is just amazing as any economical and technological evolutions are. But on the other hand, it's interesting to think about past cases, like from the past, where there was this revolution and where suddenly some people were able to financialize something that often meant that it would end up with more sort of financial segregation and more I often forget this word, more polarization. So for example, in like centuries ago, where suddenly people had the ability to put a border around a piece of land and say that this is mine, this is my property, and this property could be sold, could be like something could be borrowed against that. So out of a sudden, people who had this piece of land would just have so much more resources. And an aspect to that is that that often, as I mentioned, leads to inequality, because not everybody, or maybe different people, have different access to be able to claim something as their own and get that value. So that's one thing. And the other thing is that with time, if there is no planning for some sort of cohesion and values, and no planning for mechanisms to implement and keep those values, then naturally the chaos might lead the system to go totally in a different direction than expected. So it could be that there is this idea of democratization, decentralization, and having power to be spread among more people. But if there is a proof of stake system where there is no mechanism to try to enforce this like decentralization, then the system might end up with just several big validators and ends up being actually quite centralized in practice anyways. So those were actually several points. And the end for me.
Elizabeth, I see your hand raised.
So I worked in libraries before, or earlier in my life, and would really like to support helping libraries who have really been at the forefront of digitizing a lot of resources to make them more accessible to people. But also, like, I don't know how many libraries are then now putting things on chain. I would love if anyone has any resources around that. But this is one of the ways that I see putting more at, tokenizing more assets, whether for financial gain or not. It's the how do you then access those facts? How do you map? How do you find? What sort of databases can you query? Who's building that infrastructure? Do we have the decentralized cloud storage to support all of this, that so that Amazon can't shut it down? Like, there's so many layers to the idea of tokenizing real world assets or facts or knowledge that seems so important to any conversation about it that I don't hear enough people talking about. And I'm wondering, what is the role for libraries in this space? I've spent some time in other countries outside of the US, and like, libraries aren't the same everywhere, right? Like, they operate differently. They serve different functions in different countries. They hold different material. Here, they're now they're social service centers, right? They're not just a place where you go and do research. So I'm really curious to know if anyone is working with libraries and what role they could have in supporting the infrastructure to house and service this information.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So I think we'll come back to the libraries question in just a moment, if you don't mind, Elizabeth. I have a lot of thoughts on that, but I wanna bring Nathalia back with just two things. The first is that this notion of the unexpected is not only linked to deep technical content like Claude Shannon's mathematical theory of communication, but also James P. Caster's notion of finite and infinite games. Because in an infinite game, the idea is that we are trained for the unexpected, we train for surprise. Whereas in finite games, the classic competitions in the school system as it exists at the moment, in so many of the things which condition us, we are trained to handle the expected, for the template, the so-called factory line. So I think that's like, it's a critical point to think about, and to think about like what the unexpected in token systems really might be. I have some suggestions around it, and they mainly center upon liabilities, mainly center on that side of the balance sheet, because so much of crypto is focused on the assets and on money which might not be generated by debt, but we often forget about the power of liabilities and clearing. But I want to particularly direct you, Nathalia, to the hopes, that last part of the report. I'm not sure we'll have time for core needs, but the hopes for the future, because I think that can get us towards library economies and some of the things that Elizabeth has brought up, as well as Zaremba and Nick. And in particular, what you said about like the playfulness, the softness, the locality, and not being stuck to thinking about tokens as existing in any one medium is really fascinating. So did you pick up some of that from the hopes that practitioners in the field currently have for the future of token engineering? Are they your own? And what other kind of hopes really struck you? What really opened your heart for when doing the research?
Yeah, I think something that really appeared in the interviews was provenance. And that's something that Simon actually initially brought up. And yeah, like how are we looking at what has come and what has happened before us, before these creations that we're doing right now? And also, how do we work with memory? And in this, I also have a beautiful piece written by Kia Krautler, Memory and Orienting Toward Infinity, if anyone wants to check that out. But yeah, like how are we fostering memory and memory building in this work that goes beyond, just the fact that things are staying in the in Web3, but like also the things that evade the archive. What are some of those things? And another thing was, yeah, people really, really, really wanted to be able to work with use cases that felt real and useful and go beyond some of what a lot of people mentioned as copy paste solutions. So yeah, being able to move to different use cases. Do we have a library of use cases that people with resource can go and support and build and be in service of, those use cases instead of ideas, instead of new systems? Like, how can we look at the use cases and needs first, or as well? It doesn't need to be one or the other. And yeah, and I think the relationship building, again, the relationality felt and continues to feel like such a core piece. And people really expressed the desire to be in more spaces of conversation, having time. They were like, we need time. We want more empty spaces to be in dialogue, to share the lessons learned, and also these like libraries of knowledge, that would, where we can do some of that learning and observation as well in our own time. Yeah, those were some of the things, Andy. The softness piece is something that that has continued to show up for me over the years. Even in Twitter, if we look at Web3 Twitter, I'm like, how can this be a softer place? How can the way we communicate welcome more, more of like a radical hospitality, and I think that radical hospitality with each other is something that I learned a lot from the South in general, and growing up in Brazil, and that I would like to see more present in our different web spaces.
Yeah, there's so much that's so beautiful in that. And I wonder, just one more question before we come to the library economies, and we can expand on that, I think, at length. The link between kind of hospitality, softness, and honesty. I wonder, because that seems to me like an important part of this, that like so much of the discourse around financialization and tokens as they are often practiced in the current setup has to do with a particular kind of like hard-nosed engineering, right? Like that's like it's more engineering, and it's like less tokens and people and psyches and ways of seeing the world and mindsets. And it's like, no, we can like engineer our solutions to this, and we can model them fully, and we can understand the impact that they're going to have on the world. And it seems to me often in the world that like softness is equated with somehow like not the sort of honesty that fits into engineering. And I found that to be like one of the most interesting facets of our interactions. And I wonder if you can expand a little on the link between the two, and how it played into how the term engineer shifted in the course of your research.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, that also links back to liability. I think a lot of the hardness and the, I think the boundaries needed in some of this work come from that need, and just the whole the different levels of unexpectedness that comes with liability, and especially liability in this industry right now, and when we're dealing with social systems. So yeah, I think there is an interesting tension between form and the fluidity of systems. So how can, I think it was Artaud, I can't remember which philosopher or writer wrote about these, it's so hard to say it in English, but the soft braids or soft nods or ties, soft ties. So how can you still connect different pieces where they're firm enough to stay connected, but they are also loose enough to be able to like move in the water? And I think that with token systems right now, we have this incredible opportunity to build complex networks and like reimagine networks and what they can do. And right now, we might have been focusing a lot on the financial elements of it, by and that to me feels a bit hard, a bit too hard. And yeah, so I'm curious on like how we might look at the different links of like how can we think differently about value beyond financial settings, and also think of networks as beyond that kind of value exchange. And I think it is important to have like a level of boundaries, to think of responsibility. And you know, for me, ethics, I really rely on the work of Spinoza, and a definition that I hold to myself around ethics is how we remain open to affecting and being affected, and doing that in the direction of life alliance. So you're in alliance with life, instead of with destruction. So you're there, like you're navigating between, you know, these ideas of life and death, bad or good, but how can we go beyond the moral of like, this is, you know, even like, oh, financial is bad and like social is good. How can we go beyond that and think, how might we build something that is moving in a direction of alliance with life and of the health of the system, the health of an ecosystem, and ecosystem being something that can be, you know, can mean a lot of different things. So I would ask you all back, you know, like what would that look like for you? What matters to you? You know, what is that thing that has like a really solid shape in your life, and that you want to be in responsibility with, being affected and affecting it back. And yeah, and I'm excited to continue like building in these ecosystems and being in these conversations. So I think that that's where we can really be present with what moves actually this systems forward.
Yeah. Does anybody have an answer for that? Because I would like to provide the space and the gentleness to really let that question seep in for a moment.
I have something to share on that. As an artist and as a writer, this is something that I think about all the time, is how do we ascribe value to aesthetics like art and beauty? It seems like it adds immense value to society in a way that is not necessarily captured economically. So for me, that's the main thing. And the other thing that's hard about it is it seems like some people can naturally perceive that aspect of reality, and some people have a harder time perceiving it. And that makes it actually kind of hard to convince people that it's a real thing and that taste is not actually just completely subjective. So then how do you convince people that it's real? And then how do you convince people who aren't necessarily trained or able to perceive it as well that it actually does have value? And then how do you create an economic system around it?
Reese, I don't know if it's just me, but I cannot hear you.
Hello, does this work?
There we go.
There
Yeah.
we go.
Okay. Microphone works better when it's turned on. Anyways, Rena, I think it's really interesting what you're saying, and you were talking about economic systems of value, and there's a lot of discussion in the chat and just in general around crypto and tokens about like what's it worth and things like that. But money is a medium of exchange. It's it sort of has value in the sense that we can use it to get things we really need. Like you can't eat money and you can't necessarily stay warm with money, but you can use it to get things you can eat and stay warm with. And so I wonder, like when we're talking about different tokens or things that can support communities, the goal is not necessarily to create money, but to facilitate interactions. And maybe that kind of reframing can help the conversation, because if a community decides that they will find value in this token between themselves, like you go to a play and you pay for the play with this token, it doesn't really matter what the world thinks the token is worth if those actors know they can then go and get a massage from a massage therapist, or like go and buy a piece of art from another artist in the community that like believes in the same token. And I don't know, this is just something that I've been kicking
Yeah.
around. I don't really have a
No, I think that's
answer.
I think that's absolutely right. Like money is a proxy and
Yeah.
it's like it's like an abstracted intermediary for signifying, oh, I can get the things I really need, like food and shelter. But if those things were provided somehow through other mechanisms, through community or something like that, you're right. I think it doesn't have to be money as we think about it today.
Right, that's exactly it. And so much of the crypto like ends up on exchanges, and so whatever coin is ends up just getting driven by external factors because people know, oh, I can turn this into like a dollar or ETH or whatever, but it may be worth way more to somebody in the like enclave in Nebraska who all care about this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
One thing which strikes me about Nathalia's provocation, how can we be in service of life? How can we be in alliance with life? Is that the kind of softness that you talk about, and the vulnerability of real hospitality, which is to open yourself to radical otherness, right? To welcome in the stranger unconditionally, is an enormous courage, right? It's like a big heartedness, and in my own life that links to this notion of sincerity, which is very important in art, right? Like the sincere is a theatrical term, and it means to take on a role so wholeheartedly that the audience is forced to suspend disbelief, right? So it's no longer a question of belief or disbelief. And that's very interesting in the context of money, right? Because money is all about belief. It's about what you believe to hold value. And that belief is so strong and it's so ingrained in so many of us that it's very difficult to even get to it. To even see it as a belief is an enormous step forward, right? And so it's not about like the sincere, it goes beyond belief. It's no longer a question of like, do you believe this is good or bad, or do you believe it's in good or bad taste? It just, does this move you? Does the encounter change you? And real vulnerability, real honesty, and the kind of softness, for me is transformative, right? And that's why like I wanted Nathalia as a guest today, and not some of the other wonderful people who have been through Kernel, who would have taken the conversation in a slightly different direction, precisely because like this interplay between the tools that we use, the way that we shape them and the way that they shape us, the complexity of that interaction, but the simplicity and the softness with which it can be approached by people with a really open heart, is critical to understanding what tokens might be beyond like the current implementation of them and the way that people think about money. It leads us into this like wide open field of like genuinely programmable money, right? That's like genuinely like that. There is a whole computational universe. There's literally a computational universe of possible currencies. And the difficult thing is not necessarily to find the code that implements them. It's to find the people who are hospitable to the underlying beliefs, to the sincere performance of those beyond the belief. So, you know, I think that's we'll find many of them, and you know, it links to me in particular, like the library and memory is one instantiation of this. You know, I think that's, if you look at some of the networks which have already been built, in particular like Filecoin and Arweave, these are memorial architectures. They are ways of transcribing data across time in a way that hasn't been tried before. And they have some very interesting outcomes, which are illustrative of the kind of like infinite games that we were talking about and the kind of unexpectedness that arrives from genuine and curious experimentation and exploration. So for instance, like one small example for you, Elizabeth, is Filecoin has a very particular mechanism by which you can prove that you are storing data as a part of your contractual agreements on the network. And you have to be able, there's a sort of randomized algorithm that asks you for a particular series of bits from the data that you're supposed to be storing. And the net result of that particular challenge over the whole archive is what is known as a bit rot detector, which is a very difficult problem to have solved in computer science, right? Like if you look at academic archives, one of the things that they really care about is bit rot detection, i.e. can you tell when the archive is beginning to fall apart, because they inevitably do. And if you read Derrida, you'll know why. But the implementation of Filecoin and the necessity that they had in order to show that this decentralized network of actors is actually in accord with the agreements that they made, that they are sincerely performing their duties, has the unexpected side effect of being an incredibly powerful bit rot detection algorithm that couldn't be implemented in a centralized way, and which is inherently more efficient than a centralized way, precisely because like any centralized implementations of bit rot algorithms are forced to crawl the whole archive in order to find places which are not as they should be. So it's like one of many examples. Like Arweave is the other example. I actually prefer it for various different reasons, not to be discussed on this call, but the core insight of it is that they have at their hearts the economic structure of an endowment. And endowments are like very interesting and very, very different from a lot of the ways that we currently think about the financialization of things like libraries or other like third spaces or social goods. And again, that comes from like a necessity of the way that the network is structured, but it has all of these like very interesting and sort of unexpected side effects. So those are like very practical examples, but they come from, the sincere exploration that is so often a feature of those who are vulnerable and open to otherness, curious enough about it that they can figure out what it means to be aligned with life. Because it's a very curious question, and it's really worth reflecting on. I can't tell you, Nathalia, how grateful I am that you bring that with such clarity and such poise into Kernel. It's probably one of the most beautiful questions we've ever had on a fireside. Like how am I in alliance with life, even in like very technical or otherwise like niche domains. And in fact, like how do I carve out my own niche is related. So thank you so much. Yeah.
Such a gift to be here. And yeah, I think this is really, it's to be able to talk about that radical hospitality. It's also reminding me of, I can't remember the name of the text, but from Paul Preciado recently, or in, I don't know, some years ago, where he talks about how we don't want a revolution. We want to make love with the machines. And I just want to bring this image of, the what is intimacy also? Like what does it mean to make love to the machines? In the sense of like how to be radically like welcoming of the strangeness in the world, being technical, not being technical, but how to be intimate as it like, yeah, having that proximity to what's sincere in you and in that relationship. And I see a couple of hands up. I'd be happy to open. Yeah, not sure how we're doing on time, but I'm happy to stay and be with folks.
Vivek is our timekeeper tonight, so
Okay.
I think he will do this extra.
It's gonna be tough. You have a timekeeper who's just listening. But Young's raised his hand a while ago. Justin, perhaps more in relation to what was just being discussed, but either of you, if you'd like.
Yeah, go ahead, Justin. I'll kick it over to you and can circle back with me because this was in comment to what Reese was talking about in the Zoom chat and earlier. So over to you, my friend.
Almost somehow act how much of a response it is to what was being said, but maybe I was feeling into the, like when I listen to Andy speak and Nathalia, when I feel into the question, also just feel into the nature, like it feels like a very like deep earthen wisdom, like a compassion that comes from a very different, like a heart place to relationship to money and finance and valuing and creation. I don't know how that is, but that's what feels true in me. And I almost feel like what's coming up as I was listening was kind of like this like a very divine discontent in me, or like a sacred rage that's kind of like it's such an impossible task, and yet it feels like it's what's required to really understand what it takes to create money. Like to do so in a way that really meets the nature of the challenges of our times, and is something that honors the diversity of capacities of humans and people to be able to understand and work with, currencies or tokens or value or exchange or worth, in order to be able to meet their basic needs and to really move out of a current model of a system to really grow a new one from the people in our local communities at a local level. Or like it's such a complex and crazy endeavor, and yet something that I feel like we're being really called and challenged to do. And I just feel this just I don't know. It's like when I hear the practicalities, I also don't understand if they're true. Like obviously they obviously are working mechanically, or even they are coming about in really right ways, but something about my brain just maybe can't comprehend how to really make a way in alignment to my craft. And I just kind of, I'm not sure I'm sharing that, but it's just from my heart and my sense, because yeah, it feels like, yeah, just, I think that's what I wanted to say. I felt both inspired and confused and really looking for a way. But oftentimes, no matter how much I'm trying, it doesn't. I don't know if I'm making headway. Yeah.
I just want to praise your divine discontent. And I think that's, yeah, I think it's really important to acknowledge and really be with the tensions, that arrive. And yeah, there's a piece that I really love by Donna Haraway, that is Staying with the Trouble. It's like, yeah, we the space that comes when we stay with that impossibility. It was just the impossibility of some of these questions, and what it is, to like be in touch with that, and how uncomfortable it can be. I think it's really important, and that it doesn't necessarily need to be solved. And but that staying with it generates movement and like guides your attention in different ways. So I'm very curious about that too, just like how to pay attention, what are you paying attention to, and how that attention can open space for more movement. Thank you for all you shared.
I feel this rise in me. I have a feeling of gratitude for the time I have had in my life to read. And time has been a huge feature of what Nathalia has reflected, both in her own research, but again, also just in your presence. I feel I always have more time when I'm talking with you, which is a wonderful gift. And the discontent, there's this moment in Lord of the Rings when Gandalf and Merry are standing on the battlements of Gondor and they're looking out of the dark hordes, right? Mordor has arrived and the odds are unquestionably bad, right? Like it's incalculable. There's no way out. There's no win. There's nothing you can do. It's like a small group of men in a rundown city that has been, decaying for generations and not looked after properly, and the whole fields below are covered in orcs. And Merry says to Gandalf, says, "Is there any hope? Was there ever any hope?" And Gandalf looks at him and he says, "Just a fool's hope. Just a fool's hope." And then Merry runs up the tower and nevertheless lights the fire. He lights the signal fire, and the signal gets sent to Rohan, and Rohan will answer, famously. And they rock up also with not enough people, right? And there's still not any hope, but they have this incredible, moments of fellowship, and that's really what that whole book is about. In some sense, it's not a Bildungsroman. It's not one in which you conquer by doing good. What grips people mythologically about Lord of the Rings is that it's not about winning. It's about giving back the evil that doesn't belong in the world, right? Like that's the trope in that story. That's what made it last generations, and like the outcome is always unexpected, right? Like that's what Nathalia's been reflecting. You can't know. You never can. You never will, right? And that's part of the discontent. It's like, so much again. I'll never know. But what I can do is I can light my signal, I can light my fire, and I can make a warm hearth, and I can welcome people to it who pass by in the nights, and I can sit with them, and I can listen to their stories, and I can share a marshmallow, or if you're like into more healthy eating, like probably something better, but like also maybe a marshmallow because it's fun. I don't, so that discontent is sometimes I remember Merry and I know that it's so foolish, the whole thing. the whole thing is completely foolish. It's a fool's endeavor. But Justin, I mean, there are many, many wonderful poets and people who have said, like, we are the fools of God. It's a lovely thing to be, if you're gonna choose a life.
I love that, and it also reminds me of something by a dear poet of our times, Bayo Kamalafe, says about moving awkward instead of moving forward, and just the gift of that, the gift of moving awkward, and of getting lost, and how sometimes in the search of Omela, we create unexpected beautiful paths. So yeah, just continuing to be with moving awkward and the gift of that.
Yanks, if you'd like, we can help bring us home.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, everybody. Love conversations around token mechanism and design, and just want to bring it back to the more succinctly summary here from module 5. Tokens transmit information about facts. And would love to continue the conversation about what I think, because when you unpack like the simplicity and rudimentary ERC20 token balance of that's very prevalent with a lot of crypto Web3 projects here today, it doesn't really, and it's more of a throwback, quite honestly, copy and paste from the TradFi model of a shareholder primacy. And I think that we've all seen probably examples within various projects and governance and things like that, where it creates misaligned incentives. And I created in the Kernel Think Pieces channel a tri-token governance model that has ERC20 token balance of a proof of membership or proof of community, like a ERC 721 NFT or ERC 1155 NFT. But then third of all, a proof of contribution or proof of participation token, which really should be a sold down token. And that's one of the things that I'm really advocating of, because that gives us a lot more depth as far as for token engineering, for creating a more distributed alignment of incentives within a token design consideration. But looking forward to having more conversations on that in Slack. And thanks, everybody. Love these fireside chat conversations. And thank you for hosting, Vivek and Andy.
And Nathalia, for being with us today. The gift of moving awkward. We're one step together at a time. Thank y'all for being here. Andy, Nathalia, anything you have like to say before we go?
Just grateful again. I think there's really a shift in directionality. I don't know if that's even a word in English, but yeah, in directionality, when we are able to kind of drop that thing of like, oh, I'm trying to convince people of something, I'm trying to convince that something is valuable, but just doing I'm sharing something that's valuable to me, and that's like very sincerely, honest. So I'm grateful to be able to do that here with you today, and for the space that Kernel has been opening over the years. Excited to continue to be in conversation with you.
Obrigado, Nathalia.
Take care, everybody. Thank you, everyone, for your contributions. As always, everyone who spoke and wrote in the chat and even listened, all of it adds up to a different feeling for sure. So thanks. Take care. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.